Hey everybody, my name is Deja and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm filming my January wrap up. I've decided to make some changes to my wrap-ups because they're not my favorite to do, and I feel like last year I definitely fell off at the end, but I also wasn't reading that much. But to kind of push me to want to make these videos every month, I will be crocheting with y'all. So it's going to be like a crochet and chat January wrap-up, and most of the time I'm probably going to be working on the same project, and that is my ratings blanket. Here she is so far. I know, doesn't really look like a blanket yet, but we have a lot more to go. If you're not a crocheter, you may not understand exactly what I'm doing, which I will explain everything, all the details of the project and everything like that. So if you want to skip it because you're not interested in crochet at all, I will have a timestamp. But basically what my ratings blanket is if you haven't heard, there are these things called temperature blankets where every single day people will crochet a row of a blanket to mark the temperature for that day. So they'll normally have a range. So from like 30 to 40 degrees, it'll be one color, 40 to 50, it'll be one color, and you just crochet every single day a different color, obviously until the end of the year. But of course there's 365 days in a year, so that is a lot of different rows. So I saw my friend Beth make a ratings blanket last year or the year before, which is basically where you do the same thing but with your ratings for your books. I've also heard people do genre blankets. I've seen people do snakes, like little stuffed snakes or bookworms instead of blankets, but I am going with a blanket because I love a blanket and I haven't crocheted a blanket for myself. So I was like, even if I don't crochet any other blanket this year, I know that I will come out of 2025 with at least one blanket, which is my ratings blankets. I've done 6 rows so far of the first 6 books that I read of 2025, and we will work on this throughout the video. I want to go over all the details of the project in case you are interested, and then we will get into my statistics for the month and then the reviews. So I'm using 5 different yarns for this project. The first one is this one, and this is for 1 to 1.5 stars because yellow is not my favorite color, so I put it as the one that I would probably have the least amount of ratings for. This is Loops and Threads Impeccable yarn in the shade Pumpkin, which is like this mustard yellow. Then for 2 to 2.5 stars, this is also Loops and Threads, but this is Soft Classic in Ginger, which is like this orangey red. All these yarns are 100% acrylic and they feel very similar, so that's why I thought I could pair them together. Then for 3 to 3.5 stars, I have this purpley color, which is Big Twist Value yarn in the color Fig. 4 stars is my most prominent rating, so I put it as my favorite color, and that is this green shade. It is Loops and Threads Impeccable yarn in Sphagnum, I think is how you pronounce it, and this one does not go to 4.5. This is just for 4 stars because for me, I feel like 4.5 stars are basically 5 stars. That just didn't give me that 5-star feeling, so I grouped 4.5 and 5 stars together with this teal shade, which is Big Twist Value in dark teal. I love all these yarns. All these do come in regular skeins. I just put them into cakes because I've never caked anything, and I know people say cakes stretch out your yarn and stuff like that, but I wanted to try caking my yarn because it's a little bit controversial, but I wanted to see for myself. And I do have an extra skein of all of these yarns, but I will probably have to stock up, especially because Big Twist I think is Joann's yarn brand, or they sell it at Joann's. They also have their own website, but it's not sold anywhere else, and Joann filed for bankruptcy, so Joann's might disappear. Hopefully not, because I love Joann's. It's my favorite over any of the craft stores because I feel like they really focus on like fabrics, obviously because it's Joann's fabric store, and a lot of like crochet and stuff like that, versus other stores I feel like don't focus on it as much. For this project, I'm using a 5mm crochet hook. I'm using the Clover hooks. If you're curious, they're a little bit expensive, but I really like them so far. I got them for Christmas. And for this, I don't know if y'all can really see the stitch. I'm trying to show y'all. This is called the moss stitch, which is super easy to do. It's very tight knit, so I thought it'd be really good for a blanket. I thought about doing the granny stitch because I feel like it's bigger. We'll see how it goes. I hope to read a lot this year so I could fill out the blanket, but I feel like 6 rows is not bad. And this is how long I made my blanket. I don't even know how many inches this is. I made it big enough where it will lay across my lap, as y'all can see. Before we get into the crocheting and the reviews, I obviously go over my statistics. So in January, I read 13 books. 3 of those were by BIPOC authors, and 3 of them had queer representation. I had 0 rereads and 0 DNFs, and all the books totaled to 4,581 pages. I read 1 dystopian, 1 fantasy romance, 1 historical, 8 horror books, 1 mystery, and 1 thriller. So I read a lot of different genres this month, but I read 8 horror books, so a lot of horror books. For format, I read 5 books via audio, 0 ebooks, 2 physically, and 6 I did hybrid, which is a combination of 2 or more of any of those other formats. For audience, all 13 books were adult books. For ratings, I had 0 1 stars, 0 1.5 stars, 2 2 stars, 0 2.5, 2 3 stars, 2 3.5, 5 4 stars, 1 4.5, and 1 5-star. I had 0 DNFs and 0 that I didn't rate. For the type, I had 11 novels, 1 novella, and 1 graphic novel / manga. And for author status, I had 1 debut author, 9 new to me authors, and 3 repeat authors. In this month, I also participated in 1 readathon, which was Winterween. I started filming a vlog for it. But I didn't like how it was coming out, and I didn't really have time to post it anyways, so I scrapped that vlog. I did film 2 reading vlogs besides the attempted Winterween reading vlog, and those were both filmed in January but are coming out in February. One should already be out by the time that you're seeing this video, which was reading my subscribers' best books of 2024, and the other reading vlog that I filmed that should be coming out right after this video is reading booktubers' best books of 2024. I feel like that's why I read so many different genres this month, even though I did have a primary focus on horror, and that's why I feel like I also had so many debut and new to me authors this month, because only 3 of the 13 books that I had this month were from authors that I've already read before. I will be popping in the pictures of the books as I talk about them because I can't really hold them up and crochet at the same time, but I did read all of these books that are on my physical TBR. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books that I read of the 13. So over half of them were on my physical TBR, which makes me really, really happy. So the first book that I read in January was not for a reading vlog because I just wanted to read a book that I wanted to for my first read of the year. And I decided to read one that was off my 25 books to read in 2025 TBR. And so for that, I went with Body and Soul Food by Abby Collette. And this one is a cozy mystery that I ended up giving 3 stars. In this one, we basically follow twin siblings, a man and a woman, and they were separated at birth because their birth mother was not great, and she ended up giving them up for adoption. So one was adopted and one went into foster care. So they have reconnected over the past few years and decide to open up this bookstore cafe together. And so our female main character, she mostly runs like the bookstore side of it, and then her brother runs the kind of soul food cafe part of it. And we only get the sister's perspective in this book. We never get the brother's perspective. As most cozy mysteries go, they have a friend who ends up getting killed, and they are trying to investigate what happened to him. And this one was just an okay cozy mystery. I feel like it did a lot of things that are very traditional cozy mysteries, but then also did a lot of things that aren't traditional cozy mysteries. For example, in cozy mysteries, at the end, there generally always is kind of a big villain speech that happens, and this one didn't have that. I feel like I felt very disconnected at the end when we found out who the killer was, because we just kind of like found out. We didn't actually like hear them talk about their reasonings or why they did that, which is a very common thing that happens in almost every single cozy mystery, at least every single one that I've read. But something untraditional that I like in my cozy mysteries is a romance, and this one didn't really have much romance in it. Our female main character has a romance with her brother's friend, who is the one that passes away, so there is not really much romance in this book, and I just felt like it was okay. It was nothing spectacular, but I really was excited for this one. Honestly, I don't really remember much about it. I don't remember a lot about each cozy mystery that I read unless it's super standout, because they are so formulaic. Sorry if you guys hear a noise. I don't know what's going on. My building has been making weird, strange sounds, so I'm assuming that they're doing some work. I don't know, but I loved the setting so much, and I thought it was so like charming, which is something that I love. I love cozies that have to do with food, but I also love cozies that have to do with bookstores, and this had both, which I really enjoyed. But what also really detracted from the story for me was the female main character. She was very, very judgmental of other women, which I did not like at all. She was definitely trying to give like not like other girls vibes, and that's just not something that I am a huge fan of. I feel like girls are allowed to be girls, and if they like something that is very common to like super stereotypical, I think that's fine. But she was like, oh, I'm so different because I read and I like books, and I'm like, a lot of girls read and like books now, so it's not anything crazy or different. Like, you're just a girl just like everybody else. This book also spoiled Murder on the Orient Express very early on in the book, which I did not appreciate because I've never read that, and now I know what happens. So thank you so much to the author for spoiling that for me. But overall, this was just a fine read. I would recommend it if you like cozy mysteries, because honestly, I feel like there's not really any abhorrent cozy mysteries I've read. I would recommend the majority of them, but I also wouldn't say that this one's a favorite or a standout. It was pretty average. There's only 2 books in this series, so that is something that I like, because most cozy mystery series have like like 1,000,000,005 books, and this one doesn't, only has 2 books, and I purchased the second book before I even read the first one because I saw it at a used bookstore. So I will probably continue on with this series because I do own the second one and there's only one other book left, so I might as well. Now we're starting to get into books that have vlogs, and of course I will try and link the vlogs up in the cards. So the next book that I read was for reading subscribers' best books of 2024, and that is The Women by Kristen Hanna. I was kind of nervous going into this one because I know everybody loves her books, so I didn't think that I was going to be different and I wouldn't like her books necessarily, but I don't like historical fiction, so I was unsure how this one would go for me, especially because I'm not like interested in the Vietnam War specifically. I didn't really know much about it before reading this book, besides that it was controversial and it was pretty recent in American history compared to some other wars. But I absolutely love this book. It was my only 5-star book of the month, and I actually cried. I don't remember the last time a book made me cry before I read this book, so it's just kind of incredible how Kristen Hanna was able to do that for me. I loved it so much. In this one we follow Frankie, and at the beginning of the story she is like a 20-year-old nursing student, and her brother has gone to fight in the Vietnam War, I believe in the Navy, and she decides that she also wants to do something with her life and she wants to kind of be around her brother, so she decides to enlist in the army so she can also go to Vietnam. She enlists as a nurse, of course, because I don't think women fought in combat back then at all. She lived a very sheltered, privileged life up until this point, so she hasn't experienced many struggles in her life, but she decides to go on this adventure by herself to Vietnam to serve and help people. So she ends up going to Vietnam, and that's kind of like the first third to half of this story is her in Vietnam as a nurse, and we see a lot of like the horrors of what's happening to everybody during this time and how rough it really is to be in the medical field during war. And it was so heartbreaking to see people die and them trying so hard and it being so draining because you're working all the time. Like, what else is there really to do? I think they only had like 1 day off, and obviously the days that they were working hella long. And we see Frankie go from not knowing who she really is because she's 20 years old. She doesn't have any direction really in her life, and we see her turn into a woman through the things that she sees and the struggles that she goes through. She creates so many friendships throughout the story, specifically with 2 other women who also serve with her that are present throughout the entire book, and seeing their friendship was so beautiful to me. I absolutely loved the female friendships in this. We also see her experience love and heartbreak multiple different times with multiple different men, and I think that was very interesting. This is not a love story by any means, but it definitely has a lot of romantic love elements in it. And then in the latter half of this book, Frankie does come home from the Vietnam War, so we're seeing how America reacted to the Vietnam War, because as I said, it was a very controversial war. A lot of people didn't like the war and didn't support the war, so we're seeing that. And then we're also seeing Frankie kind of be minimized because nobody believes that she was actually in the war and that she was a veteran, because they didn't really think that women actually did go over to Vietnam. So she's really struggling with her mental health and trying to readjust to life back at home, and she tries to get help from, you know, veteran resources, but nobody is helping her. And then the second half of this book, she truly goes through so many struggles. Like, Vietnam obviously was a big low point probably in her life because she's seeing so much like battle and trauma, but in the latter half of this book she goes through a lot of different things that I cannot talk about. And that's where the story really got me, because even though Frankie was a Vietnam War veteran nurse, her and I have completely different life experiences during completely different times, and I still resonated with her story so much. I feel like she went through so many things that I have also gone through. I think it was just so beautiful how Kristen Hanna was able to create such a relatable story, but then also tell the story of women who often are not recognized, and I just absolutely loved and adored it. And I also want to say, I think the writing is extremely accessible. So if you're somebody who doesn't read historical fiction and you are interested in Kristen Hanna even a little bit, and you are kind of nervous because her books are a bit larger and it's historical fiction, don't be nervous, because she makes it so accessible. And I feel like this book literally flew by, even though it was almost 500 pages, and it truly was just so incredible, and I highly recommend it. It honestly will probably be on my favorite books of 2025 because I loved it so dearly. Next up is another book for that vlog, and that is The Horror by David Sodergren. This is a horror book that I've been seeing going around that's been pretty popular on BookTube within like the past year or so. so that I would say. And this book was really interesting. I ended up giving it 4 stars. We are following an older woman who is in her 80s. She lives alone at this Scottish fishing village. And at this village, there is a big billionaire man who's trying to come in and create a golf course that is supposed to create a lot of revenue for the town. Obviously, to do that, they have to get land. So they are trying to buy the land from the residents and buy their homes. And a lot of the older residents of this fishing village are very stubborn and do not want to give up their homes, which of course I would not want to give up my home either. And so this billionaire begins to do increasingly concerning things to try and get these older people to sell, because a lot of the younger people already left. It's a ton of money that they're offering. So the younger people are like, okay, we can get a ton of money, we can make a fresh start, and we can, you know, have a good rest of our lives. But these older people have so many memories and things that have occurred in their lives in these homes that they don't want to give up, because even our main character, her husband was a sailor and he ended up passing away, or presumed to have passed away, because he went to sail one day and never came back. And so she has so many memories with her husband in this house that she does not want to get rid of. But as I said, this billionaire is very dead set on building his golf course. One day our main character is walking along the beach and comes across this amorphous blob creature, and she realizes immediately that this creature needs help. She's never seen anything like it. She doesn't know what it is, but she ends up taking it back to her house and basically like helping it by putting it in a bathtub full of water. But then it begins to speak to her in her head and is telling her that it's hungry and it needs to feed. That's all that I really want to say about this book, because I don't want to spoil it, but I thought this was so interesting. Sometimes this does work for me, sometimes it doesn't, where the book will have like a silly horror element but then also have some really heavy commentary. This book kind of worked for me, kind of didn't. I did really enjoy it, as I said, and I enjoyed the commentary, but the horror part of this was not my favorite. I also am not a big fan of like creature features or anything like that, which this one definitely is. So that alone just made it not a 5-star for me. But if you really like creature feature or kind of like sci-fi kind of unknown horror, I think that you would really like this one. But again, I'm just not a huge fan of like these creatures that we know nothing about. So that's why this one was not a full 5-star for me. But I loved the commentary on basically like capitalism and even colonization. I brought up in the vlog that I thought it would be really interesting if this author kind of went into colonization, but unfortunately they did not include that commentary, but I think it can be applicable to that. But this idea of capitalism is very, very prominent in this story, and I loved that commentary. And this book was really gory. The kills were crazy, and I really loved them. And I also loved our main character so much, and following a character who is a little bit older in her 80s, I think was such a great move for this story. I really, really loved that element of it. So overall, I would really recommend this horror book. It's pretty short. It's only around 200 pages. So if you're interested in it at all, I would definitely recommend picking it up. For that same reading vlog, I also read Kill For Me, Kill For You, which I also gave 4 stars. This is a thriller that's been on my radar since like the end of 2023, because I saw some people who got arcs of it rave really highly about this one. And I was nervous going into it for this one as well, because I tried a Steve Kavanaugh book before that was a legal thriller, which I really like, and I soft DNF'd it. So I still own it and will probably pick it back up, especially after enjoying this one. But this one is basically a strangers on the train type situation, which if you don't know is basically where these two random strangers meet and they both have an issue with somebody. So they are like, I'll kill for you if you kill for me, basically saying I'll kill the person that you want to die and you'll kill the person that I want to die, because nobody knows that we're connected. We mostly follow Amanda in this book, and she has lost her family. Specifically, her daughter was murdered by this man, and she's convinced that he was the one that killed her, but nobody's really doing anything about it. She meets this other woman named Wendy who has also had a man destroy her life, so they decide that they are going to kill each other's bad men. And then at the same time, we're also following this woman named Ruth, and she's at home alone. I forgot to say this one takes place in New York City, which I thought was a great setting for this book. But she's at home alone, and a man comes in and stabs her so badly. She ends up in the hospital. She has to have emergency surgery, and she gets stabbed a lot in her uterus, so they don't even know that she'll ever be able to have kids. So she obviously went through a very traumatic experience, and we're following her and her husband after they are trying to readjust to her life again after, you know, going through such a traumatic event. I was on the edge of my seat when reading this one because I was so interested to figure out how all of these people connected. We also get Scott's point of view, which I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to know why we get his point of view. So this one really kept me reading, and I was very engaged in it, which has not been the reality for most thrillers that I've been reading lately. So I was just so happy to have a thriller that really like intrigued me and kept me on the edge of my seat. I also really love the twist in this one. I love a book that has like a midway through twist or a twist throughout the story. I have been reading a couple thrillers lately that have twists at the very end, like 85 to 95% of the way into the book. And I'm like, I don't feel like I should be reading 200 to 300 pages of book to get a couple measly twists. Like, I want to be interested and engaged throughout, and this one definitely had that with some twists woven into the rest of the story. I didn't give this one a full 5 stars just because I felt like some of the mental health representation in this one was a bit questionable. I think there was a lot of misinformation about therapy and mental health and mental illness that I didn't really appreciate. I don't think the representation was like the worst thing that I've ever read, but I also don't think it was necessarily good representation either. But I would still recommend this thriller if you're looking for something that has kind of like that Strangers on the Train vibe, but is going to kind of put its own twist on it. I think this one definitely did some unique things, which I really enjoyed because it's really hard to find unique thrillers nowadays, and I think this one definitely accomplished what it set out to do. Now we're getting into the books that I read for Winterween. So first up, I have Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. I've been kind of nervous to read a Darcy Coates because I know a lot of her books lean more paranormal, which is not my favorite type of horror, but this one is not that at all. It's like a locked room, like thriller mystery horror. So we're following this woman, and she is going on this remote cabin excursion with a group of other people and her boyfriend or fiance. I can't remember. I think they're just dating. So they're going on this excursion together, and they basically get trapped and isolated into this cabin. It wasn't even the cabin that they were supposed to go to, but there is like a tree that's down, and then it starts to blizzard really bad, so they're stuck. And then people start to get picked off one by one and get killed. This one I ended up giving 3.5 stars. I feel like it's more of like a 3-star for me in reality though, because I really liked the beginning setup. I thought it was very interesting in the beginning, and the end I was super floored, and I did not see it coming at all, which I feel like some people definitely would, but I didn't. So I really loved the end. I feel like the middle of this book definitely was like a slog. It was super repetitive and so isolated that I just felt like bored. I was like, okay, so when are we gonna find out what's happening? Like, obviously someone in this cabin was killing people off over and over and over again, and that's just what kept happening in the middle of this book, is people dying. But obviously we didn't figure out who was killing them until the very end. And so I felt like the middle of this was very repetitive, very boring, but at least it was atmospheric for sure, and I definitely enjoyed that part of this book. The atmosphere was incredible, and I think I would definitely pick up another Darcy Coates book. And if you're looking for something that's wintry, a locked room kind of isolated horror that has pretty good kills and a really amazing twist at the end, I think this one would be a good one to pick up, but it is a little bit boring and repetitive. Also for Winterween, I read the manga Black Paradox by Junji Ito. I love Junji Ito and I want to read more of his work. My sister actually got me this one for Christmas, so I was like, perfect, I can read it for this readathon. And this one was really interesting. I definitely enjoyed it a lot. This one I gave 4 stars. It's not my favorite Junji Ito, but I liked it more than most people, I think, because it was just very interesting to me. We are following 4 strangers that basically met on the internet, and the reason that they are coming together is because they all want to commit suicide. So they have like a suicide pact. They're going to commit suicide together, and that's all honestly I can really say about this one, because it goes in a very, very different direction than you would probably anticipate. I really liked it a lot. I thought it was very creative and very interesting. I don't think everybody's gonna love this one, but I definitely did. I thought the direction was so creative, just how Junji Ito always is. He is so creative in his work, and I really love it. And of course, I love his art style. It is one of my favorite manga art styles I've ever seen. I haven't read a ton of manga, but sometimes manga art style is not my favorite, but his style is so phenomenal, and his books get so dark and weird. And this one is definitely more of like a weird one. It's not super dark, but it definitely goes in kind of like a weird sci-fi almost direction. He only has a few manga that is like one story throughout the entire thing, and this is one of them, which I kind of prefer. A lot of his other work is like a bunch of short stories together, which is not always my favorite, but I love his work that is definitely like one story all followed throughout continuously. And this one, I would just recommend it, honestly. Like, Junji Ito is so amazing, incredibly talented and creative. So if you want to pick up a manga and this one sounds interesting to you because it has to do with like a suicide pact, which definitely intrigued me, I would highly recommend this one. I have another 3.5, and that is Misery by Stephen King. Again, another one I read for Winterween because it's very wintry. And this is my first Stephen King I've read in a while. I've read a couple of his books and I own a few, but I haven't read one in the past couple years, I don't think. We're following this writer of a very, very popular series with a main character named Misery. And he has some really devoted fans, but he was kind of tired of the series, so he ends up finishing the series and ending it off with Misery dying. So he's just traveling one day and he ends up getting into an accident all by himself and he is injured. His legs are basically like broken. I don't know if we find out exactly if they're broken or not, but he's immobile for sure. So this woman named Annie Wilkes finds him and begins to like take care of him and take him in, but she is a super crazy fan of his work and his series, specifically with Misery, and she loves Misery as a character. So she's very, very upset about the ending of the series and begins to hold him captive and torture him to convince him to write another book in the series that satisfies her and what she wants to happen with Misery. This one is definitely crazy because Annie is literally insane. She is a crazy woman and does some crazy things in this book. I do think it was a little bit slow, but the things that Annie does definitely kind of keeps you motivated throughout the story, and you see her escalate and get really bad. And even though we weren't in Annie's perspective, I feel like we really saw a lot about her psyche. Even though they have different motives for why they do what they do, I feel like Pearl from the movie Pearl, you know, X, I feel like she is pretty similar to Annie, specifically like the movie Pearl, because they both are in like past time periods, a little bit historical, and they do have different motivations, as I said, but they both are kind of like these unhinged women. And I could totally imagine Annie doing that face that Pearl does at the end of the movie where she's just smiling with the tears running down her face and she looks psychotic. Like, that literally embodies Annie as well. So I really liked that aspect. And Pearl to me, again, is like another like slower movie as well, but it is so incredible. And this book is also like that. It is a really, really good book, but it is a little bit slower. I really liked the ending of this one as well, and it also had inserts of the book that he was writing, which I also enjoyed. I liked seeing what he was actually writing. I love when books have an element like that. I will say this book does have some racist remarks from Annie specifically. That changes how people view it, especially because it came from the villain. I personally didn't like it. I do understand this was written in like a different time, but still, like, it was very jarring. And then also, if you think about it, like, the narrator for this is white, and so now we're having a random white person say the N-word with a hard R. Like, that's crazy to me. And it was very jarring. I literally had to rewind it because I was like, did I just hear what I heard? And I definitely did. So if you are triggered by slurs at all, I would not recommend this one because it definitely does have slurs in it and some things in it that are not politically correct today. But overall, it was a really good story, and if you like Pearl, I think you would definitely enjoy this one. Then I wrapped up my Reading Subscribers Best Books of 2024 vlog with I Who Have Never Known Men. This was my first 2-star of the month, and I feel like sometimes I'm not reading the same books that y'all are reading, because this one, to me, I was like, why is everybody hyping this book up so much? Like, everybody has been raving, loving this book. It has such high reviews. Everybody loves it. And for me, I was like, okay, because we're following this woman who lives in like this prison bunker cave thing, and she lives with just other women, and they are being held captive, but they don't know why. They have no idea where they are, how they got there, nothing. She is the youngest one there, so she has no idea what her life was like before this. The other women are a little bit older, so they do remember like husbands, wives, families, stuff like that, but she does not remember that. They do have guards that are men, but they barely interact with them, so our main character has never really known men, hence the title. And then one day a siren goes off and all of the guard men literally run out and are never to be seen again. So these women obviously escape and go out into this world, and it's not what they really remember Earth to be. So we don't really know if this is like on a different planet, if it's like post-apocalyptic, we don't really know, but that is kind of part of the book. And so these women are trying to travel to find if there's anything else, obviously, to stay alive and have resources and stuff like that. And that is basically what we follow for 2/3 of this book. They're only in the bunker for a short period of time, but the majority of the time is them on the outside in this world. And I just felt like it was so boring. Like, nothing happened in this story. And I feel like it was trying to make this commentary on isolation, but it didn't hit for me, because just because you have something happening in a book or you're trying to attempt to put commentary on something in a book doesn't mean that you're actually making any commentary. This happened to me with Big Swiss as well, where in that book I feel like the author was trying to have commentary on all these different things but didn't, because she just included them in the book but she didn't actually say anything meaningful about those things. And that's how I felt about this book as well. I thought it was so boring, and this book added literally nothing to my life. I thought it was gonna have a lot more to do with like gender roles and stuff like that because of the title, and it does a little bit but not as much as you would think. And I just thought this book was so boring, and I don't know why people love it so much. Like, I truly don't understand. I wish someone could explain it to me because I don't get it. Moving on to the books for the next vlog that I started, which was reading BookTuber's best books of 2024. I read The Reformatory by Tana Reeve-Dew, and that's actually the row that I'm crocheting right now is for The Reformatory, which, if you guys remember the colors for the yarn, I gave it 4 stars. I actually did pick this one up back in October, and it was just so heavy I had to softy enough it because I was just not in the right headspace for it. So if you are not in the right headspace for this book, please do not go into it, and please look up trigger warnings. This one takes place in 1950s Florida, so definitely like in the South during the Jim Crow era, and we are following this boy named Robbie, and one day he ends up kicking the son of like the town's largest landowner, who is obviously white, in defense of his sister Gloria, who is older than him, and he ends up getting sent to this reformatory, which is obviously like a school to reform boys, basically like what we would consider like juvie now, but it was like the reformatory back then. And we are following him and his sister. We're getting both their perspectives as, you know, Robbie is experiencing the reformatory and the true horrors that are at the reformatory, but then we're also following Gloria and her perspective and what she is dealing with during the Jim Crow era as a black girl, and then also her trying to save her brother and get her brother out of this reformatory, because a lot of boys have actually gone missing at this reformatory and nobody knows what happened to them and nobody really cares to look into it. Robbie also has this ability to see ghosts, and that is a big part of this book. I wouldn't say that's the horror of this book, which is what I was nervous about, because again, I don't really like paranormal horror very much at all. So if this book was really heavily focused on the paranormal like that, I don't think I would have liked it. So that's not really the horror in this book. It's just a part of this book. I forgot to mention that Robbie and Gloria are kind of on their own because their mother passed away, and then their father is basically coming under fire for a lot of different things in this town, and a lot of people do not like him and basically want him dead. So he flees to Chicago, leaving Gloria and Robbie alone. So they are dealing with all of this on their own, but they definitely do have a support system, especially Gloria. She definitely has a support system supporting her and Robbie and trying to help get him out. This book is really heavy. The things that happen at this reformatory are truly horrific and show that horrible things were happening to black people not that long ago. Literally, I think white people were eating black people until like the 1970s. There are literal cookbooks on how to cook black people from not that long ago. So there are truly horrific things happening to black people during these eras, and people don't believe that racism still exists. But this was not that long ago. Like, my dad was born about a decade after this book took place. My grandparents were alive when this book took place. So it's really like not that far in the past. And the reformatory truly is horrible. Like, it is so horrible, but I love the relationship between Robbie and Gloria, and even though they were separated for the majority of this book, I loved seeing their relationship even though they were apart, and how much they truly cared about each other. But then also Robbie has his own relationships with the boys in this reformatory, and Gloria has her own relationships with people outside this reformatory. I love seeing those relationships and seeing black people find community even in the darkest of times. The only reason that I really didn't give this book 5 stars, I feel like in my vlog I talked a lot about it being like paranormal, and that truly isn't it, because the way that the ghosts were incorporated into this story didn't really bother me. But the main issue truly was the length of this book. This book was very long and a bit slow, I would say. I wouldn't say it like dragged. It has a very consistent, slow, steady pace. And for me, reading about racial horrors and racial trauma for that long was just a lot. And it was just a lot for me personally. I feel like if you're black especially, be cautious going into this book. This is a real trauma that we share, and it is very, very hard and difficult to read, and it goes on for a very long time. I just feel like if it was shorter, I would have enjoyed it more because it would have been a bit more palatable for me. But I understand why the author chose to make it so long and show the horrors and extend it out for as long as possible, because this is stuff that real black people experience for their entire lives. lives. But for me personally, it was just very hard for me to read and very hard for me to stomach, as it should be for most people. And I also feel like this book, because it was so long, was a bit repetitive and it diluted the story's message a little bit. This one is incredibly powerful and definitely is very profound, so I would highly recommend this one if you can handle the trigger warnings and handle racial horror and just be in the right headspace to read this book, because as I said, it is long and it is something that is very hard to read. For that video, I also read When the Moon Hatched, and this one was another 2-star, which I'm also crocheting right now. And again, this is another case where I'm like, am I reading the same book that everybody else is reading? This one is a romance, and we follow this assassin character who works for the rebellion in this, you know, universe or world or country or whatever you want to call it. She works for the rebellion in this kingdom. But then the crown sends out a bounty hunter to basically, you know, get people who are in this rebellion, and she gets caught and is taken and captured. But she's saved by this guy named Khan. I don't want to spoil it, so I don't want to say like who he is, but he ends up saving her and it is their romance. I just feel like this one, I was like, girl, what? Like, how did so many people love this book? First of all, this book has no real plot at all. Like, I was so interested in our main character, Rave, and how she was this assassin who worked for this rebellion. We never really return to that ever again. Like, it's at the very beginning of the book and then gone, poof, like never returned to. And I was like, I was so interested in that, and that literally went nowhere. And there's no plot in the story. Like, I couldn't even tell you other things that happened in the story because literally nothing happens, and this book is over 700 pages. It dragged on for so long because literally nothing was going on. And the world was so interesting and premise, but in execution it was done so poorly. The author introduced so many different things and had an extensive glossary that was literally 21 screenshots long of the Kindle app, because I was listening to the audiobook and I screenshotted the glossary so I could look at it, and it is literally so long because the author didn't do any of the work to actually introduce you to any of the concepts. Like, you need to rely on the glossary, and I don't think that's how fantasy books should be. There is like an elemental magic system that's also introduced into this story, but it is never really used at all. And I understand it might be used further into the series, but I will not be reading that, so it doesn't really matter to me. But the elemental magic was barely ever used, and it was so interesting, but it wasn't really present. And there is also like dragons and stuff in this, and they aren't really like characters like in Fourth Wing. They are more like related to the plot, and I feel like it was so unique in its vision, but it came across so clunky. And I don't know, I feel like the author just needed to do a lot more work on this one, because it just did not feel like a fully fleshed out story that had a lot of effort and energy put into making it interesting. I feel like the author just had an interesting concept and attempted to execute it, and it didn't go well. And then the romance, the whole point of this book, I did not like it at all because the characters had no chemistry whatsoever. Like, they had no chemistry at all. Khan really did love her a lot, but I feel like our main character, Rave, she literally had no inner monologue or ever said anything nice about him at all. Like, she literally was just like, he's so hot, and like, that's it. She never talked about his personality or any traits about him or anything at all. The romance took up so many pages of the story, but still somehow managed to be shallow and underdeveloped, and I feel like that's truly a skill. To give so much page time to a romance and it still turn out trash is kind of insane. But I just did not like this one. I know the girlies be eating it up, but I feel like it was very lackluster, and a lot of things were very promising in this story but were not executed well at all. Next up, I have a 3-star, and that is Incidents Around the House by Josh Mallerman. This one, we follow a 8-year-old girl, and she has a very stereotypical family, but then she begins to see this entity that she calls Other Mommy, who asks to go into her heart. This one is paranormal for sure. I feel like if you like the movies like Insidious, you would definitely like this one, and this is also one that I read for Reading Booktuber's Best Books of 2024. I knew this one was probably not going to be for me because I don't like paranormal horror, and that is the whole point of this story. I feel like it did do a great job at using the paranormal horror as a metaphor for like childhood trauma and learning things too early in life, but I don't really care. Like, I just don't like it. Even though I think it was pretty well executed, I just don't like horror. I hate when it relates to ghosts. Like, I just don't like it. I can appreciate it, but I don't enjoy it ever at all. Like, I just don't like it. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you, but I don't. And then also the parents in this were absolutely terrible. We get no perspective from the adults in the story at all. It completely takes place from the perspective of the little girl, which I liked. I feel like us, the readers, had a lot of things explained to us in weird ways because it is completely told through her perspective. I think if we had an adult perspective in the story, it could have even been a 4-star. I don't think I would probably ever give a paranormal story or haunting or anything like that more than 4 stars, but this one could have definitely been a 4-star if the parents weren't trash. And I feel like that has a lot to do with the commentary in the story, but I really did not like it at all. I feel like they were so bad, and the way that things had to be explained in the story, specifically relating to them, was really awful because it was completely told through the child's perspective, which again, I liked it, but it had some downfalls and some negatives to the story. I would definitely recommend this one. People love it so much. I think it's just me and my aversion to paranormal horror, but if you have a lot of childhood trauma, I think that you would really love this one, specifically like childhood trauma relating to your parents. That's not a personal experience that I ever faced, so maybe that's another reason why I didn't really resonate with this story, but I see why people love it so much. It just wasn't the story for me. Next up, I just read a graphic novel on my own time called Eat the Rich by Sarah Gailey. I saw this one at the library and I've seen people reading it recently, and the cover and the title really intrigued me, as well as it being written by Sarah Gailey because I loved her work, The Echo Wife, and I also really liked Just Like Home, which is more of like a paranormal story that I did give 4 stars because I really, really liked it for it being paranormal, and this one did not disappoint. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was really good. We are following this girl who has the seemingly perfect rich boyfriend while she's in law school. He's also in law school, I believe, and she is going to spend the summer with them at their perfect family home on this like island. There's something dark lurking deep within this family and this community that is around them. I can't really say much more about this one, but I really enjoyed it, and I loved the commentary on this one. It has a lot to do with like classism, as you could tell by like Eat the Rich, and I think it hit especially hard right now with everything that's happening in the world with the billionaires. I cannot stand them, guys. Like, oh my god. But I feel like it was definitely very poignant and powerful because of the time period that we are currently living in. And I loved the direction that the story went to. It also has some sapphic representation in it, which I really, really liked. I was not expecting it at all, but I really enjoyed it. And I think that this was such an interesting concept. It was executed very well. The only thing is that the art style was not my favorite, and that's why I didn't give it a full 5 star, but I loved everything else about the story. I thought it was so well done, and it's literally a graphic novel. Like, I highly recommend you pick it up because again, it's so poignant to what's happening right now, and it's so quick to read. And lastly, for reading those booktubers best books of 2024 vlog, I read We Used to Live Here, and this one I ended up giving 4 stars. I really, really liked it. This one follows a queer couple who renovates homes. So they just moved into this new home, and one of them is home alone when this man comes and he's like, hey, I used to live here. Can I come in and show my family around? Him and his family are moving cross country, and they made this like a little pit stop. Our main character really does not want to let them in, but she does it anyway because she's very much like a people pleaser. So she lets them in, and this family will not leave. This one is very, very eerie. I feel like I really like the beginning setup of the story. The middle kind of dragged a little bit for me, but then the ending I loved. I know a lot of people feel like it's too open-ended and that it didn't really have an ending, but I absolutely loved it. And I feel like I love a story that allows me to have a lot of theories and really think about the ending. And I feel like this is one where I will really be thinking about it and like what happened at the end for a very long time, because it just went in a completely different direction than I anticipated. This one is not really paranormal with ghosts, which is what I personally don't like. So if you also don't really like paranormal with ghosts, this is not what that book is about. It's completely different, but it does have to do with like a house. I heard a lot of people relate this to House of Leaves, which I do own but haven't read. So if you like that book, maybe you would also like this one, but I haven't read that, so I can't really say. But I really love the end so much in the direction that the story went to. I didn't see it at all. I just wish it kept me a little bit more engaged throughout the middle of the story, and then I would have really loved it and given it 5 stars. But people really do love this book, so that may just be like a me problem, honestly. But I think that most people would really enjoy this one, so I think that you should definitely pick this one up if you like horror and you like things that go in kind of like weird directions. This one also has like a mixed media element in it that I really loved as well. So if you like mixed media, especially in your horror, I think you would really enjoy this one. So this is how far I made it onto the blanket. I believe I'm on row 11, which is for incidents around the house. So I'm almost done with January. I wasn't sure if I would finish it in this video, which I'm not, but I'll definitely catch up and do a little bit of February before we even have our February wrap up. So we will see the progress of this blanket over time, and I feel like it's really starting to come together now because it has more rows, and I'm so happy with it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this wrap up in this format. It took me way longer to film, so we'll see how much it actually ends up being when I edit it, but I hope that you guys enjoyed it a lot because I had so much fun crocheting and chatting with y'all. If you made it to the end, I would love to hear what your favorite favorite book of January was, and if you disagree with me on any of these books, I know I had some controversial opinions. While you're down there as well, leave the little yarn ball emoji because you know I'm crocheting, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye everybody. I'm writing rhymes in the kitchen, soaking the moments we live in. Yeah, you got the nerve to be on me, thinking your life at a hygiene. If you got my number, don't